Hi everybody. Today I'm going to show you how I made this simple paper cutout animation of a mountainscape being drawn on and then a sun rising behind it. So the first thing we need to do is start a new project. So I'm going to click here to do that, and then I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to change the name of this to Mountain Mograph. And I'm putting this in my advanced video folder and then in a folder I created specifically for this project called Mountain Mograph, and I'll click Save. And then we're going to start a new composition, and I'm going to make sure that my settings are 1920 by 1080 and the duration is 6 seconds long. And I'm going to change the composition name to Main Mountain Mograph, and then I'll click OK. So I have my composition set up, and now I need to bring over the mountains I'm going to animate. So I'm going to go over to Adobe Illustrator where I created this simple mountain scene, and let me show you what we have here. We have a background layer, we have a highlight layer, we have an outline of the mountains, and then we have some shadow as well. And so all of these things are working together to give us a little bit of the illusion of depth and dimension to this. So I'm just going to hit Control A on a PC or Command A on a Mac to select all of this, and I'm going to press Control C to copy, Command C on a Mac. We're going to go back over to After Effects, and then in our layer stack we're going to right click and say New Solid. And I want this to be kind of a deep blue-green color. So I'll choose something like that, I'll click OK, and I'm going to call this Mountain Outline. And click OK again. And with this layer selected, we just have this blank swatch of color, but when we press Control V or Command V on a Mac, it's going to bring in the shape of our mountains. So we just pasted a bunch of different masks onto this solid, and if I hit M on the keyboard, it's going to show me that I have 4 masks, and those correspond to those different layers from our Illustrator file. So we're going to make 4 copies of this layer, and the easiest way to do that is to click on the layer and press Control D 3 times or Command D on a Mac. I'm going to turn off the top 3 of these, and then I'll hit M on my keyboard to bring up my masks again, and I'm going to start deleting out some of these masks. So let's just see what happens if we delete all but the last one. So that's our shadow layer, because we can see that it's just the shadows on here. So I'm going to rename this to Mountain Shadow. Drag that one to the top. I'll turn it off. I'll turn on this bottom one here. And we deleted everything but mask 4 last time, so let's delete everything but mask 3 this time and see what we're left with. So this is our outline. So we can leave this one called Mountain Outline, and I'll drag that to the top here. And then let's turn this off and turn on our next layer. Hit M on the keyboard to bring up our masks. Last time we deleted everything except for number 3, so this time let's delete everything except for number 2. And this looks to be either our background or our highlight layer. It doesn't really matter because they're the same. So I'm going to change this to Mountain Highlight, and I'll drag this to under our shadows. And then this last one, I'm going to hit M again on the keyboard, turn it on, and I'll delete everything except for mask 1. And then I'll change the name of this to Mountain Background. So I want to change the colors of each of these. I'm going to turn them all on now, but they're all the same color, so we're not really seeing anything. And actually I'm going to leave Mountain Outline off for now, and I'll show you why in a sec. But the background I want to change to a slightly different color than this. I want it to just be a little bit lighter. So I'm going to press Control Shift Y. If you're on a Mac, that's going to be Command Shift Y. And this is going to allow me to change the color of this. So if I click on this color here, I'm just going to drag this up a little bit so it's a little bit brighter, and I'll click OK. And now our color is slightly different, which if this layer is showing through, we can see. And then for our mountain highlight, I'm going to do that again. I'm going to hit Control Shift Y, and I'll click on my color swatch, and I'm going to change this to very nearly white, but just a little bit gray, because these are going to be the highlights on our mountain. Then I'll click OK. And then we'll change, we're going to leave our shadows exactly where they are, and we're going to leave our outline where it is too. So let's go ahead and turn on that outline layer, and we can actually turn off everything else for now. This is probably a good moment to save so we don't lose anything. And we want this outline to be drawn on the screen as if it's being hand drawn. So to do that, we're going to go over to our effects and presets and search for stroke. We're going to grab this stroke effect and drag it onto our mountain outline layer. And what this is doing is grabbing any mask that is on the layer and creating a stroke from it. So we can see we have this white stroke from that mask layer. But the issue is we still have all of this background. So let's change a few settings here. Let's change our brush size to 3 so that we have a slightly thicker stroke, so it's a little bit easier to see. And I also want to change the color of the stroke. I actually want it to be the same color that we have back here. So I'm going to click this handy eyedropper tool, and any color that I click on now, it's going to tell After Effects that's what I want the color of my stroke to be. So now we have the color is the same as our background, which means we can't see anything anymore when we click away, but that's not a problem. We're going to go over to paint style. We're going to change this from on original image to on transparent. And when we do that, we can see that we have this stroke in this blue-green color. So if we turn on all of our other layers, now we have the full mountain scene. So let's work on drawing on that stroke. I'm going to turn off my other layers again. And there's a really easy setting that allows us to make it look like this is being hand drawn, and it's this end parameter in our stroke. So if I change this to like 40%, we can see that now only part of this stroke is on screen. If I go to like 64%, now more of the stroke is on, so you guys get the point. We're animating this so that more and more of the stroke is on screen. So I'm going to put my playhead at the beginning of the composition. I'm going to hit the stopwatch next to this end parameter to tell After Effects at this moment in time we want, well, actually we're going to change this to 0. We want 0% of this stroke to be on screen, and then we're going to move our playhead to something like 2 seconds, and then we'll make this 100%. So over the course of those 2 seconds, the stroke is going to appear on screen. So let's go ahead and select our mountain outline layer, hit U on the keyboard, and that's going to bring up our keyframes. We'll drag a box around both keyframes, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. This is going to smooth out our animation a little bit. And then let's play this through to see what it looks like. Okay, so that looks good. Next, let's make our background layer fade on, and I kind of want it to appear from the bottom of the screen and end at the top. So to do that, I'm going to turn my background layer on, and I want this to animate on, so I think the easiest way to do that is to use a mask. So if I grab my rectangle tool and select my background layer and then draw a mask, it's not quite doing what we want it to do. It's actually just revealing more of this blank color swatch that we started with, because remember, we just pasted masks onto this solid color layer. So I'm going to press Control Z to undo this, and instead I'm going to right click on my mountain background layer, and I'm going to say pre-compose, and I'm going to call this mountain background pre-comp. Actually, you know what? I'm going to put the pre-comp at the beginning so we can say nice and organized. So I'm going to say pre-comp mountain background. And then I want to change this to move all attributes into the new composition. This is really important. So make sure to click that, and then we can click OK. And if we go back to our project window, now we're going to see a second composition in here. We have our main mountain Mograph, but we also now have our pre-comp mountain background. If I double click on this, it's going to open this composition, and all that's in here is this same layer, this solid with a mask on it that's cutting out the shape of our mountains. But if we go back to our main mountain composition and we click on this pre-comp layer and hit M, we don't see any mask on here. So this is just being treated kind of like a piece of footage. So now if we bring, if we go and grab our rectangle tool and draw a mask, it's going to do what we expect it to do, which is everything inside of the mask is being revealed and everything outside of it is being concealed. So if I hover over the edge of this mask and double click to select it, we can see that happening here. I'm going to delete this mask because I actually want to use an ellipse to make this mask. So I'm going to click and hold on my rectangle tool and grab my ellipse tool. And then I want to zoom out a little bit so I have a little more room to work. So I'm going to click on this drop down menu and I'll change my viewer size to 50%. And then I'm just going to click and drag with my ellipse tool around my mountains. And again, it's really important that we have our pre-comp layer selected when we do this. And now this is revealing everything inside of the mask, which is everything. But we're going to animate this mask so that at the beginning it's concealing a lot of, or actually all of this background layer. So I'm going to bring my playhead to maybe like 1 second, maybe like halfway through when the outline is being drawn on. And I'm going to click on my pre-comp layer, hit M on the keyboard to bring up my mask path parameter. I'm going to hit this stopwatch button to tell After Effects I want to animate this parameter. And then I'm going to grab my selection tool, hover over the edge of the mask until my cursor turns black, double click to select the entire mask. You'll see this bounding box come up if you've done it correctly. And this just means that I can click and drag anywhere within this bounding box to move the entire mask. So I'm just going to move this straight down, right out of frame. And this is going to tell After Effects that at this moment in time, at 1 second, this is where our mask is located. And then I'm going to go to this 2 second point, right when our stroke is finishing. And I'm going to move this mask again. I'm going to hover over the edge of it, double click to select the mask, and then just drag it back up. So now we have 2 keyframes in here, and this background is fading on screen just as that stroke is being finished. One thing I want to change about this, I'm not crazy about these hard edges here, how it goes from stark color to no color at all. So to do that, I'm going to click on my pre-comp layer, hit MF to bring up my mask feather, and then I will change this from 0 to 200. So this is going to soften this out. We now have this really smooth transition from color to no color. And let's just go back and watch this and make sure everything looks the way we want it to. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So the next thing that we want to do is bring our shadows on screen. So I think I want that to start around maybe like 1.25 seconds. So like 1 second and 6 frames. And I'm going to grab my shadow layer here. I'm going to turn it back on, and we're going to create another pre-comp by right-clicking on our shadow layer, going to pre-compose. We're going to change the name of this to pre-comp mountain shadow. Make sure that we're moving all attributes into the new composition. It's really important. And then we'll click OK. And I'm going to go back to my ellipse tool. And this time I want my shadows to come from the bottom left and finish at the top right. So I'm going to draw another ellipse mask, but this time I have my pre-comp mountain shadow layer selected. So kind of like this. And then I'm going to click on this layer, hit M on my keyboard to bring up my mask path parameter, click the stopwatch to create a keyframe. And this time I think what I'll do is I want the shadows to finish up maybe at about 2 seconds and 6 frames. So I'm actually gonna just go ahead and move to that point in the timeline while I already have my finished mask exactly where I want it. And I'll click this button here, this little diamond, to create another keyframe. And so now at this moment in time, this is where my mask is gonna be, which is revealing the entire image underneath. And then I'm going to go back to that first keyframe I created at 1 second and 6 frames. And if I click on my playhead to drag it and then I hold down Shift, it's going to automatically snap to where I've created a keyframe, which can be really handy for moving around your composition quickly. So I'm back on this original keyframe and I want to change where this mask is located now. So I'm going to click on my selection tool. I'm going to hover over the edge of the mask until my cursor turns black, double click. Here's my bounding box. I can click and drag anywhere within this mask. And I'm just going to drag this down to the bottom left corner of my composition. and then I'll press enter to save that change. And I'm going to click and drag a box around my keyframes, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. And I'm also going to click on my pre-comp mountain shadow and add a feather to this as well. So I'm going to hit MF on the keyboard to bring up mask feather, and I'm going to change this to 200 just like we did with our background layer. So now if we play this through, we should see the outline happening, and then the background layer coming up from the bottom and the shadow layer coming from the bottom left to the top right. So let's see if that's happening. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So now we're going to bring our highlights on as well, and I want them to animate on from the opposite direction from where the shadows came from. So they're going to come from the top right and end up in the bottom left. So let's go ahead and turn this layer on, and we're going to pre-compose it again. So we're going to click on it, right click, pre-compose, delete out this part at the end, go to the beginning. I'm going to type pre-comp. And again, we want to make sure that we're moving all attributes into the new composition. Then we can click OK. With this layer selected, we're going to come up to our ellipse, and we're going to draw another mask roughly the same size and shape as the other ones that we've drawn. And then we can click on our layer, hit M on the keyboard to bring up our mask path parameter. And I want this to start animating on maybe at like 2.5 seconds, I think. And so I'm going to click the stopwatch button. That's going to put a keyframe at that 2.5 second point. Then I'm going to go to the 3.5 second point, and then add another keyframe where we want this mask to end up. I'll go back to that initial keyframe, and now I'm going to go to my selection tool, double click to select the mask, and then we'll just move it out of frame. Hit enter. And we're going to feather this mask out as well. So let's go MF, change this to 200. And we also want to make our keyframes easy ease. So with our layer selected, hit U on the keyboard to bring up those keyframes, click and drag a box around them, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. So let's watch this through. We should have our full animation happening now. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm wondering if we're going to want to make the highlights come on a little bit more quickly, but let's leave them for now, and we can play around with that later. So now let's create the sun that's going to be rising behind our mountains. And first what I want to do is select all of these layers. You can either click and drag a box around them, or you can click on the top one, hold down Shift, click on the bottom one. And then I'm just going to drag these down so that the bottom of the mountains meets up with the bottom of the frame. So let's go up to our ellipse tool, and we want to make sure that nothing is selected in our layer stack. So I'm going to grab this ellipse tool, and then when I click and drag, we're able to make an ellipse of whatever proportions that we want, but we want this to be a perfect circle. So to do that, I'm going to hold down Shift, and this is going to constrain our proportions to a perfect circle. So I'm going to make this a pretty big, exaggerated sun, maybe something like this. Then I'll grab my selection tool and click and drag this into place. And then of course this needs to be in the background because it's going to be rising behind the mountains. And I'm going to press enter to rename this. We'll call it sun. And I want to change the fill style to a gradient instead of a solid color. So I'm going to click on fill here, and then I'm going to click on radial gradient and say OK. And then I'm going to click and drag this line here to change the way our gradient is working. I just want to have a little bit more dimension here. So a little bit darker around the edges, a little bit brighter in the middle. That looks pretty good, but I'm not happy with the color. I think I want to change this up a little bit. So I'm going to click on my swatch here, and then I'm going to change this brighter color to something a little bit more reddish orange, but not so saturated, maybe something like that. And then I'll click on my darker color, and I'm going to make this red and dark and saturated. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe not quite so dark. Okay, I'm happy with that, and I'll click OK. Okay, so our sun is looking pretty good, but we need to animate it now. So let's click on our sun layer, hit P on the keyboard to bring up our position parameter, and then let's find the moment when our highlights have completely come on screen. So maybe like right here. And I want my sun to be fully risen just a little bit after that. So I'm gonna go to like just a little bit after 4 seconds. I'm gonna hit the stopwatch next to my position parameter. I'm gonna drag my playhead back to where I want the sun to start rising, maybe at like 1.5 seconds. And then I'm gonna drag the sun down below my composition. And then select both keyframes, change them to easy ease, and let's see how this looks. So that looks good. It looks like the sun is rising naturally. It's making these highlights show up on the mountain, so I'm happy with that. So the next thing I want to do is add some texture to all of this because it's looking a little bit flat to me. So to do that, I brought in a couple of texture files, and I will link to those in the description so that you're able to download those yourself if you'd like to use them. And I'm going to bring this texture gray into my composition. I'm going to put it at the top of the layer stack. I'm going to hit S on my keyboard, and I'm going to adjust the scale a little bit. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller. And obviously this is covering everything up. So to change that, we want to make sure that we have this mode option here. If you don't see this, right click, choose columns, and then make sure modes is selected. And then underneath of this T, we can hit this little checkbox. And this is going to make it so that the layers underneath are cutting out the texture up above. But obviously we're not seeing all the detail in our mountains and our sun that we do want to see. So we're going to change the blend mode of our texture to soft light, and now we can see the color, we can see the shadows and the highlights, so we can see our sun, but we can also see the texture on top of that. So one thing I'm realizing is that I want the outline on the mountains to actually be a little bit thicker than this. So I'm going to go into my mountain outline layer here and into my effect controls. I'm going to change this to 8, just so it stands out a little bit more. I think that looks better. And then the next thing I want to do is make it look like each of these different elements are sitting on top of one another. So it looks kind of like paper cutouts. So first let's bring in a background so this is easier to see. And we can just right click, say new, solid, and we'll call this BG for background. I'm going with this slightly warm dark gray color. I'll click OK. To bring it in, drag it to the bottom of the layer stack. And over in my effects and presets, I searched for drop to find my drop shadow effect here. And then I'm just going to drag this onto my mountain outline layer first. And we'll zoom in here and we can see what's happening. It's just adding this little drop shadow. And actually the default on that I think looks pretty good. So I'm going to leave that one as it is, and then I'm going to come down to my mountain shadow. I'm going to drag another drop shadow on here, and this time I'm going to change my settings to 7 for the distance, and I'm just going to drag the softness up a little bit to maybe something like 9 or 10. 10 here, and I think that looks pretty good. I think I'll change the opacity to 75. So that we can see it a little bit better, and then at that point maybe we can change our softness to 15. And then I'm going to click on this drop shadow effect, Control C to copy it, and then I'm going to select both my mountain highlight and my mountain background layer, and you know what, we may as well select our sun as well, and we'll Control V to paste onto all 3 of those layers. So now we have that same drop shadow on all of our layers, and we can see it happening around the edge of the sun, around the edge of our shadow layer, and so that's looking pretty nice. When I zoom out, I'm not as happy with the outline drop shadow as I was initially, so I'm going to go back into my outline layer, and maybe I'll change this to the same settings and see how that looks. Okay, that's looking better. And maybe we'll change the opacity as well. So we're almost done, but I want to make a change to my background. So first I'm going to grab all of my layers except for my background. So this texture all the way through the sun layer. I'm going to right click, pre-compose. We'll call this pre-comp mountain animation. And now we're left with our background layer, and I'm going to bring an effect called gradient. And I'm going to drop it onto our background. So this is allowing us to have one color up at the top and another color down toward the bottom, and they fade between one another. So I'm going to click on my start color and I'm going to change this to a dark blue. And then I'm going to click on my end color and I'm going to change this to kind of an orangish color here, maybe a little bit redder than that. Let's see how that looks. I think that's pretty good. And then I'll click OK. And then I'm going to go back into my project window and I'm going to find another texture here, this texture white. And I'm going to drag this down above my background layer, and let's hit the S on the keyboard and scale this down a little bit. Something like that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to overlay. And then I'll click on my layer again, hit T on the keyboard to bring up my opacity parameter, and I'm going to change this to 25%. Now that we have our finished background in there, I'm going to go back and make a few subtle changes to my drop shadows as well. So I'm going to double click on my pre-comp mountain animation to get back into these layers, and I'm going to change my sun drop shadow so that the distance is 15 and the softness is 30. And I'm going to change the drop shadow on the pre-comp mountain background so that we can see it. So I'm going to change the angle of it first so that we see it cutting across the sun. And then I'm going to make this really big. I think I'm going to do a distance of 30 and a softness of 30 as well. And if I go back to my main comp, let's see how this looks. I think that looks better now. So let's play this through. I think this is a finished composition now. Yep, I'm happy with that. So as always, thank you for watching, and let me know if you have any questions.